Raya Adams gripped her coffee cup tighter as she stepped into the glossy lobby of the Astor Grand Hotel, nerves buzzing under her skin. She'd signed up for the 3-day business seminar to pad her resume, not to lock eyes with a man like him. He stood at the front of the ballroom, tall and striking, flipping through notes without a hint of nervousness. His navy suit clung to him like it had been tailored by the gods, and when he finally looked up, his crystal-gray eyes scanned the room like he already owned it. Raya slid into the third row, adjusting her blazer, trying to look more confident than she felt. She hadn't expected the keynote speaker to be young, magnetic, and if she wasn't mistaken, kind of gorgeous. A woman next to her leaned over. "That's Xander Elwood, CEO of Elwood Ventures. He's worth hundreds of millions." Raya blinked. "Wait, that's the Xander Elwood?" "Yep, youngest self-made tech millionaire in the state." Before she could fully process that, Xander stepped up to the podium, his voice smooth and calm. "Let's talk about risk, not the kind you calculate, but the kind you feel here." He tapped his chest once. The room went silent. Raya wasn't sure if it was the content or the man delivering it, but she was hooked. She scribbled notes, asked questions during the Q&A, and didn't notice him watching her until the last session ended. "Miss." He began, stepping down from the stage as the room emptied. "Adams," she said quickly. "Raya Adams," he smiled, not the showy kind. "You asked about market saturation. I didn't get to answer that properly." Raya straightened her spine. "That's okay." "I figured you were come walk with me," he interrupted, already moving toward the hallway. She hesitated for half a second before following him. They ended up in the rooftop bar of the hotel, surprisingly quiet for a Friday evening. The city skyline glowed behind him as they sat at a private corner table. A waiter brought over 2 drinks Raya hadn't even ordered. "I took the liberty," he said casually. She raised an eyebrow. "You assume a lot for someone who just met me. You asked the best question in the room." "I don't usually notice people at these things." He paused. "But I noticed you." Raya's stomach did that ridiculous flip she hadn't felt since college. "So, is this how you network? Invite random seminar guests to rooftop bars?" His expression turned serious. "No. I've never done this before." She frowned slightly, unsure if he was messing with her. "You said you don't notice people, but you're the center of attention. You own the room." Xander looked out at the skyline. "I own a lot of rooms, doesn't mean they feel full." That shut her up. She wasn't expecting that kind of honesty from a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. "I didn't come here looking for anything," Raya said quietly. "I just wanted to learn." "Well, I wasn't looking either," he replied, turning to her. "But here you are, and I'm curious." "About what?" "You." The next 2 days passed in a blur. Every time Xander gave a presentation, his eyes would find Raya's in the crowd. She tried to ignore it to focus on the content, but the pull between them was electric. On the second evening, she found a note slipped into her seminar folder. No name, just "dinner at 8, look for the car outside." Raya stood on the curb, torn between excitement and suspicion. But when a sleek black town car pulled up and the driver opened the door with a quiet "Miss Adams," she couldn't make herself walk away. The car took her to an intimate rooftop restaurant with fairy lights strung overhead, overlooking the river. Xander was already waiting, a glass of wine in hand, no tie, sleeves rolled, looking less like a CEO and more like a man trying not to look too eager. "You came," he said, standing as she sat across from him. "I'm not sure if I should be flattered or freaked out." "I'm not trying to impress you," he said. "I just want to know you." The dinner was unlike anything she'd experienced: lobster ravioli, truffle risotto, and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her rent. But it wasn't the food that left her breathless. It was the way Xander listened, really listened. Like every word she said mattered. By the time dessert arrived, he leaned forward and asked, "Tell me something real, not your resume, not your LinkedIn, just you." Raya hesitated. "I grew up in a tiny town in Nebraska. My dad owned a hardware store. I moved here 5 years ago with 2 suitcases and no backup plan." Xander smiled. "That's real. What about you? Something not in your press release." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "I was engaged once." "She left me the day after I made my first 10 million, Raya blinked. "Why?" She said she didn't know if I loved her or just loved winning. Raya's chest tightened. "Do you?" "What?" "Love winning." He held her gaze. "Not as much as I'm starting to love talking to you." She looked away, heart pounding. It was insane. She'd known him for 2 days, but she didn't leave. The seminar ended the next morning, and Raya assumed they'd part ways, go back to their lives. He was a millionaire CEO. She was just a girl trying to climb the ladder. But when she stepped out of the hotel, Xander was there, leaning against a luxury car, sunglasses low on his nose. "You're leaving without saying goodbye?" he asked. "I figured we already had our moment." "I don't want a moment," he said. "I want more." She stared at him. "More what?" "More dinners, more walks, more time. You make me want things I stopped believing in." Raya shook her head. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to want to." He stepped closer, brushing a hair from her cheek. "This doesn't feel like a coincidence, and I don't do random," she swallowed. "This is crazy." "I know." But she didn't stop him when he kissed her, slow and warm, right there on a busy city sidewalk, and for the first time in a long time, crazy didn't feel wrong. It felt like the start of something neither of them had expected. But neither could walk away from. 3 days later, Raya stood outside the modest brick building that housed the marketing firm where she'd been working for the last 8 months. She stared at the glass door, her tote bag weighed down with folders and documents. But her thoughts were tangled somewhere else entirely, somewhere with a rooftop restaurant, a deep voice that asked real questions, and a man whose presence still lingered like a scent she couldn't shake. The world around her had gone back to normal coffee queues, traffic noise, deadlines, but something inside her hadn't. She didn't expect the call, not from him. "Raya," he said, his voice steady but slower than she remembered it. "Are you free this week?" She hesitated. "Why?" "I'm flying to Chicago for a day. I want you to come with me." "Chicago?" "There's a tech expo and I have a few meetings, but more than that, I'd like to see you again." She glanced at the spreadsheets sticking out of her tote. "I don't exactly get to vanish from work." "I already spoke to your manager," her breath caught. "You what?" "I had my assistant reach out this morning. You've got 2 personal days approved. You were overdue, apparently." "Xander, I'm not trying to control anything. I just wanted to make it easier for you to say yes." She didn't know what surprised her more, that he'd made the arrangements or that her manager had agreed. "I'll be outside your building at 9 tomorrow, he added. "If you don't want to come, I'll understand." But she did. The next morning, a black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door with a nod, and inside, Xander sat typing something on a slim laptop. He looked up as she slid in beside him, his expression unreadable for a beat before breaking into something warmer. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't either." The drive to the private terminal was quiet but not awkward. She watched him work, his focus absolute. When they boarded the jet, sleek, spotless, and lined with pale leather, he turned to her. "I didn't bring you here just to impress you." "Then why did you?" she asked, settling into the seat across from him. "Because I don't know how to half like someone." She didn't answer, not with words, but the way she looked at him said enough. She didn't want half of anything either. Chicago was cold and glassy, the skyline sharp against the winter sky. Xander's meetings took place in a building that had its own concierge and valet system. And while he handled business, one of his team members, a woman named Vera, escorted Raya to a nearby gallery exhibit. "She said you studied design once," Vera explained. "He thought you might like it." Raya stared at the abstract installations, a hollow ache blooming in her chest. She hadn't mentioned her early design classes to anyone in years, not even friends. She dropped them when rent became more important than dreams. When Xander met her afterward, he didn't say anything, just handed her a paper cup of spiced tea and led her down Michigan Avenue like they'd done it 100 times before. "You remembered what I said," she murmured. "I remember everything you say." They walked in silence past the glittering storefronts and traffic lights. When they reached the river, he stopped. "I don't know what this is yet," he said, "but it's not casual for me." she hesitated. You don't even know what my life looks like. I don't have 5 assistants or a jet. I share an apartment with peeling paint and a radiator that sounds like it's dying. I can't just disappear to Chicago whenever I want. I'm not asking you to become someone else. Then what are you asking? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught, but he opened it slowly, not to reveal jewelry but a slim brass key with a tiny engraved R on the end. What is that? A place in the West End. I bought it years ago, too quiet for me, but I thought if you ever needed time, space, freedom, no expectations, just you creating. Existing, that key is yours. She stared at it, words stuck in her throat. You barely know me. I know enough to want to give you something no one else ever has. She took the box, not knowing what to do with it but unable to say no. That night, after a private dinner on the 32nd floor of a building he said he'd invested in, she stood beside the window and stared at the twinkling lights below. You never talk about your family, she said. He poured them both wine before answering. My mother passed before I finished high school. My father and I don't really speak. Why? He never liked that I didn't want to take over the manufacturing business. When I started Elwood Ventures, he called it a playground for bored rich kids. We haven't had dinner since. She looked at him then, really looked. You built all of this alone. I had a few good mentors, but the worst days, I only had myself. Raya set her glass down. You don't have to do that anymore. He turned to her, eyes searching. You mean that? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. Not yet. You scare the hell out of me. Why? Because I've never wanted something I couldn't control. Until now. She reached for him then, fingers curling around his lapel not to pull him in but to anchor herself. Then maybe we both need to learn what it means to lose control. They didn't kiss, not that night. Instead, they sat on the floor with their backs against the window, talking until dawn. About things they'd never told anyone else. The kind of truths that change people. By the time the jet returned them home, something between them had shifted. Not louder or bolder, just deeper. As the car dropped her off in front of her building, he didn't try to convince her of anything. He just said, "Let me know if you use the key." Then he left. And for the first time in years, Raya walked into her apartment feeling like something extraordinary had just begun. Raya stepped into the quiet of the West End apartment, the key still warm from where it had pressed against her palm during the long walk over. She hadn't told anyone she was coming, not even Xander. The place was untouched, pristine but not sterile. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a tree-lined street and every corner held quiet intention. A stack of blank sketchbooks sat neatly on a console table. An easel stood by the window, untouched but waiting. She ran her fingers along the windowsill, absorbing the silence. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like an invitation. 2 days passed before she heard from him again. Not through a call, he showed up outside her building just as she was locking up for work, leaning casually against the hood of his car in a dark wool coat, eyes unreadable until they landed on her. You used the key, he said. I did. How long did you stay? Long enough to remember what breathing feels like. He opened the passenger door. Come with me, she hesitated. No rooftop restaurants, no jets, just a drive. They didn't talk much as the city faded behind them. After an hour, the skyline gave way to open roads and bare winter trees. Eventually, Xander pulled onto a gravel path that led to a weathered cottage on a frozen lake. A single chimney puffed smoke into the gray sky. My godfather's place, he said, unlocking the front door. He passed last year. I haven't been back since. You brought me here for a reason. I needed to remember why I started all this. She stepped inside first, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. Everything smelled faintly of pine and old books. A fire crackled in the hearth. Why now? She asked. Xander stood in the doorway, watching her. Because I'm starting to forget what matters. I've been building towers so high I can't see the ground anymore. And you think I'm the ground. I think you remind me what it feels like to be real. Raya turned away, staring at the frozen lake through the dusty window. I'm not sure I can be what you want, Xander. I don't move through the world the way you do. I don't want someone who reflects my life. I want someone who challenges it. She crossed the room, stopping just feet from him. This is all happening fast. It's not speed that scares people. It's falling without knowing if the ground will catch you. You're used to people catching you. No, he said. I'm used to falling alone. That night they cooked in the tiny kitchen stale pasta and canned sauce, laughing when the water boiled over. He burned the garlic. She teased him until he tossed a dish towel at her head. When the power flickered after midnight, they lit candles and stayed wrapped in blankets near the fire. "Why me?" she asked, voice quiet. He leaned his head back, watching the flames. "Because when you look at me, you don't see numbers. You see a man trying." Raya studied his profile, the way his jaw tightened when he wasn't speaking. "And what are you trying to do right now? Undo the damage." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. When she finally reached for his hand, he didn't flinch or pretend not to notice. He just held hers gently, like it was something fragile he wasn't used to being trusted with. The next morning, they walked along the edge of the frozen shore, boots crunching over snow. Xander stopped near a crooked bench and stared out across the ice. "This is where I first pitched a company idea," he said. "I was 17. My godfather pretended to invest $10,000 just to shut me up. He never told me until years later that he never filed the paperwork. Said I needed to fail once before I earned anything. Did you hate him for it?" "No, I hated myself." She looked at him, surprised. "I thought I was supposed to be ahead of everyone. I didn't realize how much failure teaches you until I had to start from zero again. And now, I don't want to succeed if it means being alone at the top." He turned to her. "I want to build something with someone who won't disappear when the lights flicker." Raya exhaled slowly. "You say all the right things. I don't want to be right, I want to be honest. You're not used to not being in control, are you? Not even a little." They returned to the city that evening. He dropped her off without asking when he'd see her next. His restraint made her ache more than if he'd begged. The next morning, Raya opened her email to a subject line that stopped her cold. "Proposal." Inside was a single sentence. "Would you consider partnering with me on a new creative consulting venture?" Attached was a document outlining roles, funding, and full creative control hers. She stared at her screen for a long time before picking up her phone. "You're insane," she said when he answered. "I've been called worse." "You want to hire me?" "No, I want to build something with you. This isn't a job offer, it's something else. It's a door, I'm holding it open. You don't have to walk through. What if I do and it ruins what we have? I'd rather risk something real than protect something unfinished." She didn't reply. But later that night, she sent back the signed draft with one note. "Let's build it carefully." That weekend, they met in a quiet co-working space in Midtown. No assistants, no suits, just whiteboards, coffee, and 1,000 ideas between them. Xander listened more than he spoke. Raya challenged every budget line, every pitch angle. He didn't push back. He leaned in. By Sunday afternoon, they had a name, a logo, a vision. He leaned back in his chair, watching her scribble notes under a messy sketch. "You look alive when you're creating," he said. She didn't look up. "I feel alive." And for the first time, he didn't look like a man chasing the next empire. He looked like a man finally standing still. Raya stood on the marble steps of the Elwood Ventures headquarters, a folder of pitch mock-ups pressed against her chest and the wind catching the ends of her coat. Her breath clouded in the air, but it wasn't the cold that made her hesitate before stepping through the glass doors. Inside, the atrium buzzed with quiet efficiency. Assistants moved briskly between offices, and the faint hum of elevator doors echoed off the high ceilings. She walked past the security desk without needing to check in. Everyone had learned her name. The elevator opened directly into the top-floor conference suite. Xander was already seated at the long table, sleeves rolled up, head down, reviewing mock-ups she'd emailed the night before. He didn't look up when she entered. Your typography revisions were risky, he said. They made the message clearer. He finally glanced up. They did. She slid into the chair beside him, her bag still over her shoulder. You haven't said anything about the rollout plan. I don't want to tweak something that's already better than what I imagined. That's not your usual approach. I'm learning. They worked in silence for a while, interrupted only by Vera bringing them coffee and brief updates. By mid-afternoon, the last of the team cleared out, leaving the room quiet again. Raya stood and walked to the wall of windows, watching the city blur under the soft gray sky. What happens when this works? She asked without turning around. Xander rested his forearms on the table. It's already working. I mean after the launch, after the press releases, after the buzz fades, what's left? He rose slowly and walked to her, stopping at a careful distance. Whatever you want to be left. That's not an answer. He studied her for a moment. I want to build a life with someone who challenges me, not just a company. You've never been a temporary decision for me. She finally turned to face him. It would be easier if you were. I know. There was a knock at the door. Neither of them moved. Vera peeked in. Sorry, but the board is ready downstairs. They're expecting both of you. Raya's brows lifted. Both? Xander didn't look away from her. They want to hear from the creative lead directly. I told them if they didn't, we'd postpone the meeting. She blinked. You used leverage on your own board. I don't care about traditions. I care about what's right. They took the elevator down together. As they stepped into the boardroom, 10 sharply dressed individuals turned toward them. Xander introduced her without hesitation, then sat beside her while she laid out the strategy they'd worked on for weeks. When she finished, no one asked about her background. No one questioned her authority. They only asked smart, precise questions about the campaign itself. And when the meeting adjourned, the oldest member of the board reached out to shake her hand. You've given this company a new voice, she said warmly. Raya kept her composure until she and Xander were back in the elevator. I thought you said they were conservative. They are. What changed? They saw what I see. That evening, she returned to the West End apartment alone. She didn't turn on the lights right away. She stood in the quiet, her hands resting on the kitchen counter, and tried to understand the heaviness in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was the weight of being seen. The next morning, she found a note on her doorstep. Not an email, not a text. A handwritten envelope with her name in bold ink. Inside was a single line. Come to the roof at 7, dress warm. She climbed the stairs of the building she hadn't even known had roof access. When she pushed the door open, the cold bit at her face, but the sight stole her breath. Hundreds of tiny lanterns floated above a canopy of string lights. A small table stood near the edge, set for two, with a spread of warm pastries, tea, and candles flickering inside glass holders. Xander stood nearby, hands in his coat pockets, watching her like she was the only thing that existed. Why? She asked softly. You said you didn't want rooftop restaurants. I also said I didn't like being cold. He stepped closer. I'm trying to learn both. She looked around, heart pounding. You did all this for me. I needed to remind you that I don't care about what's expected. I care about what's real. Her eyes flicked to the table. You remembered I like almond croissants. I remember everything you say, even the things you don't realize you're sharing. She stepped closer. What are we doing, Xander? Falling into something that doesn't come with a manual. And what if we mess it up? Then we fix it. And if we can't, then we fight for it. She took another step. This isn't simple. No, he said, reaching gently for her hands, but it's yours. If you want it. The wind whipped around them, but she didn't let go. I've never had someone stand still long enough to fight for me. He tightened his grip. Then let me be the first. She leaned in, forehead resting against his. You already are. He kissed her then, not like the first time. This time it was slower, certain, the kind of kiss that closes old doors and opens new ones. Later, wrapped in a blanket beside the rooftop heater, she looked out at the city and asked, What happens now? Xander pressed his lips to her temple. We build everything. Together. 6 weeks later, they stood at the unveiling of their joint venture, a launch party hosted in a converted warehouse filled with art, sound, and light. Investors and creatives mingled, but all eyes eventually turned to the stage as Xander took the mic. "I've built companies before," he began, "but this one didn't start with capital. It started with a question, from a woman who saw something I didn't." Raya watched from the side of the stage, arms crossed, heart hammering. "I didn't expect to find her at a seminar. I didn't expect to fall in love, but the best things in life don't wait for permission. They just happen. And when they do, you hold on." He turned toward her, hand outstretched. She walked up, took it, and faced the crowd together. There were no speeches after that. Just music, laughter, and the kind of joy that doesn't need explanation. Later that night, in the quiet of the West End apartment, she curled up beside him and said, "You know, I only signed up for that seminar because I couldn't afford the bigger ones." He smiled against her hair. "Then I owe Fate a thank you." "No," she whispered. "You owe her nothing. You fought for this, for us." He kissed her shoulder. "Then I'll keep fighting, every day," and he did. The first snow of the season fell in soft, heavy silence, blanketing the city in white as if it were preparing to pause for something important. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of the West End apartment, Raya watched flakes swirl around the edges of the glass, her sketchpad balanced on her knees. She wasn't drawing. Not yet. Her pencil rested still between her fingers, her mind somewhere far from the page. Behind her, Xander's voice drifted in from the kitchen as he wrapped up a call. He'd been making a point to keep his work hours separate lately. No more midnight emails. No more answering calls during dinner. And though he never said it directly, she knew exactly who he was changing for. When he stepped into the room, she didn't turn to look at him, but he didn't seem to expect her to. Instead, he crossed to the windows and stood quietly beside her, eyes on the snow too. "The team confirmed the Paris gallery feature," he said. "Your name's front and center on the brand collaboration." She glanced at him, surprised. "You said that was still pending." "It was. This morning they finalized it. They want your designs at their spring showcase." Raya set the sketchpad aside. "That's in less than 3 months." "I know." Her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. "I haven't even started the final concepts. You'll have time. I already cleared your calendar for next week." She raised a brow. "You did what?" Xander shrugged, unapologetic. "You said once you needed space to create. I'm giving it to you." She leaned against him, the side of her head brushing his shoulder. "You always do the impossible." "Not impossible, just inconvenient," he replied. "But worth it." The next few weeks blurred into long hours of design work and business meetings, but everything felt different now. Lighter. Every time she looked up from her desk, Xander was there, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a new idea, always with that steady look she'd come to depend on. One night, they hosted their first gallery preview at a warehouse space downtown, where her designs were suspended like silk sculptures under soft lighting. The crowd was thicker than she'd expected: investors, artists, press, and for the first time, Raya didn't feel like she was borrowing someone else's spotlight. She stood under it, fully seen. As the last of the guests trickled out and the lights dimmed, she turned to Xander, barefoot now after hours in heels, her hand still wrapped around a half-finished glass of champagne. "You realize what we did?" she asked. He stepped closer, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "We built something that wasn't supposed to happen." "I didn't know it could feel like this," she whispered. "To create something and love someone at the same time without one taking from the other." He took the glass from her hand and set it aside. "That's because no one ever gave you both. And you think you can. I already am." He kissed her then there, under the remnants of laughter and applause in the middle of a room she had filled with her vision. Later that night, they returned to the apartment. She pulled a blanket around her shoulders as she curled up on the sofa, feet tucked beneath her. Xander paced slowly near the fireplace, something unreadable in his expression. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Dangerous," she teased, but her voice softened when she saw his face. "You know I never planned for any of this. You, us," he paused. But now I can't see a future where you're not the center of it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. It wasn't new edges worn, corners curled. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it gently. Inside, the pages were filled with notes, ideas, names of cities, color palettes, and sketches. But one page near the middle made her breath catch her name, repeated over and over again in different styles. Block letters, script, bold, soft. And beside it, a single line. Find the place where everything begins and ask her to stay. She looked up, eyes wide. I started that notebook the day I met you, he said. I didn't know what I was doing at first. I just knew I had to remember every detail. Raya pressed her palm to the page. And what is this exactly? His voice dropped. It's me asking you to begin something permanent. She closed the notebook slowly, her heart thudding loud enough to drown out the fire's crackle. I don't want a ring to convince you, he added. I want us to promise each other something real. Not perfect, not easy, just real. Every day. She rose to her feet, her blanket falling away. You already gave me what no one else had. He stepped into her space. Then say yes. She nodded, unable to speak. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like he'd waited years for this moment. And maybe, in a way, he had. Months passed. The launch in Paris was more than a success, it was a revelation. Raya's designs were picked up by 2 international brands, and their joint venture was heralded in industry circles as a model of creative business synergy. But more than accolades, it gave them something far more precious: time. They moved into a townhome just outside the city, a quiet place with ivy on the walls and a sunroom she turned into a studio. Xander kept his penthouse for meetings and late-night strategy sessions, but it was the townhome he came back to every night. It was where they built their life. They traveled not for business, but for joy. Rome in the fall, Kyoto in spring. A small cottage in the Scottish Highlands where he finally let himself do nothing for 5 days straight. On the 1-year anniversary of the night she used the key to the West End apartment, Xander brought her back there. The apartment hadn't changed, but the world around them had. They stood by the same window, the city lights below, and he handed her a small white envelope. Inside was a deed transfer, the apartment fully in her name. I don't want you to ever wonder if you belong somewhere, he said simply. You belong here always. She didn't cry. She just stepped forward and kissed him like he was the axis her world spun on, because he was. That winter, they married in the townhome's small garden, just the 2 of them and a justice of the peace. No press, no spectacle. Just whispered vows and bare feet on cold stone, laughter warm enough to melt the frost. Afterward, they curled up on the couch with red wine and old records, the quiet kind of joy that doesn't need an audience. And when the snow came again, they watched it fall from the same window where everything had begun, not as strangers, not as partners, but as 2 people who had chosen, every single day, to build something extraordinary together. Forever.